Hey folks, welcome back to Gaming Garbage, where we take a look at games, chat about the gaming news in the industry, and of course stream for fun. Today we're talking about Elden Ring NightReign. Now, just to preface this a little bit, this is not to dissuade anyone necessarily. This is just to present information as it is, as I've played it through the closed beta and also on actual release day. So I have, I don't know, probably roughly about 8 or 10 sessions through my belt. I've been able to look at a bunch of other stuff in the game. I've roamed around in the world. I've played a little bit of the characters. And there's actually a little bit more than I anticipated, but we're going to go over basically the base game, not try to give away too much, and then have final thoughts at the end. But this is not a project by Miyazaki. So I wish to actually make that clear. Some people think it is, and it's not. Right now, Steam and Xbox Store, basically it has a score of about 65 out of 100. So some people like this and some people don't. And then, of course, there's some people in the middle. So yeah, NightReign isn't for everyone. This is not a Dark Souls game. It just looks like one. All of the assets are from Elden Ring, basically, and there might be a little bit actually from Dark Souls. And so think of you and two others basically doing a battle royale against NPCs and not players as the map slowly closes in into a circle, just like Fortnite or Apex or something like that. Outside the circle, yeah, you just burn to death and die. You basically have 6 characters at the start, and there is a 7th one you can actually unlock. Each has their own focus and skills and abilities and roles to play on a team. There are also relics you can find and earn to beef up your character traits passively, and these you can actually earn and keep. This is kind of like loot that you can acquire. You don't necessarily find these so far. You just basically earn them after a session. And the further you get into your session, the better your rewards are. So some of these two are also oddly specific, like more damage on frostbitten enemies, which is interesting. All of these are also color-coded and fit in specific slots for each specific character, and you can do up to 3. Base weapons are basically static for each character class. You can also only play solo and trios still. There is no duos like we were hoping for from the closed beta, and this is also not cross-platform. So you're just going to play with PlayStation folks or PC or Xbox wherever you are. You're not going to be mixing and matching at all. There is also no voice chat, so the best way to communicate is basically to jump up and down. There are also some voice stones that you can buy, only 2 so far, which are not really great for communicating anyway. And then there are also the normal emotes that we know, like pointing and sitting and that kind of thing. You can also mark locations on your map in real time, and you can actually open this up and still move around at the same time too, which is nice. But you're unable to turn your camera. The game session is basically 3 nights, with each night having a boss, and each boss gets harder after each day. Most of these so far have been multiple bosses at a time for the first and second stages, or maybe there's some other enemies popping around. So it's never just one individual enemy. There's always something else going on. And then eventually with the final boss, you have a final boss at the very end. And this is something that I didn't expect, is that while there are multiple final bosses in the game, they're not randomized. You actually get to pick which one you're starting with. So there's only one available, which I'll call 3 Dog. It has 3 heads, right? It's basically Cerberus. And that final boss you basically pick. And when you beat him, then you're able to unlock the next final boss. And you basically work through all of the bosses until you've actually beaten them all. So if you're actually stuck on a particular boss, like 3 Dog, you're just out of luck. You don't get to fight any other bosses. You get to fight just him until you beat him. And not everyone's going to like that. Most of the time, randoms are pretty awful. As time goes on, they will eventually quit. Again, these are people that probably don't necessarily play Fortnite or Warzone or some of these other games. Don't necessarily know the mechanics too well, but they have played like Dark Souls and Elden Ring, but at a slower pace. And this game is very, very fast-paced. So most people, I don't think, will even make it past the first boss, 3 Dog. I don't think they'll unlock any other final bosses. I could be proven wrong given the time, but people aren't usually as patient as they used to be. From the closed beta to release, the game is also harder. So having a team of 3 being able to work through basically the first and second days, or the first and second nights in the session, and it was fairly easy to actually get to the final boss at the end. This time, most of my sessions were not even making it past the first night. And so I've only had one match so far where we've actually gotten to the very end to face 3 dog, which is kind of crazy. And this too, we were at level 10, and it still wasn't enough. Each one of us was on the team, and we were all melee, helping each other out. There was actually fairly good nonverbal communication between all of us. We actually all had fairly good weapons too, and yeah, level 10 was still not enough. And the whole gameplay loop is basically all off of efficiency. You basically running your butt off as fast as you can to kill as many enemies and mini bosses as you can before the day ends and the night closes in. And then you're leveling up as quickly as you can, finding all the weapons. There really is no hunting and poking around or exploring like we used to. And the map itself so far, through all of my PlayStations, have actually been really static. There hasn't been a lot of changes or any randomization. Basically, buildings and structures are pretty much in the same place. And so once you start learning the map, you don't have to continuously relearn it, at least so far. Maybe that changes when you unlock a new final boss. Maybe that map will be different. I could kind of anticipate that, but I haven't beaten 3 dog yet, so I can't speak to that. Ultimately, this looks and kind of feels like a From Software game with the combat and stuff like that again, but it plays very, very different. And while there are things that we recognize, there's also a lot of there isn't really a lot of time to actually do them. So exploring and leveling up your weapons and searching for gear, that's actually going to be pretty limited. So the game movement itself is actually pretty streamlined. I mean, you're able to traverse very quickly. You basically have infinite sprint like you did in the previous game, but you're also able to double jump and scale up certain cliffs that are kind of color-coded for you. It's not obnoxious, but you can kind of think of that Ubisoft yellow that we all know. So yeah, you're able to move actually pretty quickly. You're able to do things pretty quickly. But, you know, for some folks, it's going to be too fast. And it's going to take some adjustment actually getting used to that, because you want to open everything. You want to explore everything. And you can't really do that in this game at all. You got to keep moving. The game currently runs at basically 60 frames per second. There is also a quality mode, which is going to probably dip that down for everybody. I'm assuming on consoles, probably 30 frames per second. I'm currently playing on an Xbox, and I'm getting consistently, once I've loaded in, 50 to 58 frames. That's where a lot of the combat actually hinges, and it's fairly stable. I wouldn't say it's the most stable, but it's fairly stable. Loading in, I get down to 40. So yeah, that initial load in is a little rough. Kind of like Oblivion Remaster, right? You could kind of think of it like that. Currently, the game is $40. There is also another session you can buy with additional DLC that will be coming in the future for $55. But honestly, for me, I think 40 feels a little too high. Maybe 55 would be a pretty good price for the DLC, but again, we don't know exactly what all that's going to entail. Probably some extra final bosses, maybe another map or something, but we're not entirely sure. So I imagine if the game does well, we're going to continue to have future updates and DLC to buy for the game. If it doesn't do well, this is probably just going to be it with that one DLC. So ultimately, I think From Software, they should be careful. I mean, just from my perspective, I've been playing since like 97, since Armored Core Project Phantasma. Maybe that was 98. I've been playing a long time. And so yeah, I've played Dark Souls 1, 2, and 3, Sekiro, Bloodborne, and I've played Elden Ring. And the thing that I wished for was not exactly quite here. And yeah, I do think From Software should be careful because of the audience that they've built. They've taken the last roughly 20 years building this audience with their type of game and their game mechanics and their enemies and their lore and the style and beauty of the game. It's all still there. It still looks awesome, especially when you get toward the end. But again, it doesn't play like a From Software game. And I think people certainly buying into this are going to feel misguided a little bit because it says Elden Ring. And yes, it looks like Elden Ring, but it doesn't play like it. So I just want to emphasize that as much as I can. Currently looking at score breakdowns as much as I can, especially at least on the Xbox store, where it's all broken down into stars. About 50% are giving it a 5 out of 5. There's another 25% that are giving it 4 through 2, and then there's another like 25% that don't like it at all, that are basically giving it a 1. And so, yeah, people are kind of split either between the 5 stars or 1 star. And again, it's just about meeting expectations. So the whole game design is placing most of the difficulty factors on who you're playing with, the randoms, and then also the time limit. Again, you don't have that time to really scurry around, and if you've been slow, you haven't gone through enough mini bosses during the day, there's basically no way you can actually even get through the first night. It's going to be quite challenging for you, even with the team. And again, that fast pacedness, just this a lot. Some of the audience just has not adapted to that or played some of these other type of games, so that is going to be pretty challenging. Also, there's Dust Bugs in the future, which we know is going to be another multiplayer game in 2026, just for the Switch 2 only, as far as we know. But this is like a PvPvE type of game. So it's a different style of multiplayer, but again, if we're having this level of reaction, roughly 25 or 30% not liking it for 1 to 2 stars. Same with Steam as well. I think it's sitting at a 65 right now out of 100. That's roughly about 30% of the people that are trying your game and not liking it very much. Yeah, 25, 30%. And so, yeah, if we have another multiplayer game that of a different type of genre where there's you and some other teams, and then partway through the session, sounds like there's going to be a PvE element, and you can all decide either to go after each other or go after the NPC basically, and then finish the session or like extract something like that. But yeah, we're not entirely sure, but I just think 2 multiplayer games like this in a row is not necessarily going to sit very well with some of the player base, and you're going to create this idea of like From Software is changing. And I certainly think it is. I think Miyazaki maybe has 1 or 2 more projects in him, and then these multiplayer projects, they're going to be taken over basically by somebody else, and someone else will be running From Software. And maybe there's going to be more of a multiplayer focus, more of a live service focus, and that's going to be disappointing for some of us, myself included. Not to say that there won't be more Dark Souls or more Bloodborne or Elden Ring or something else, but just that Miyazaki has created something so amazing, and he has such a player base. But these multiplayer games kind of feel like it's shifting away from that. And the multiplayer games, they could still be wonderful and amazing, but putting out 2 back to back like this kind of feels a little off. It seems a little rushed. Too much of a shift for some of the audience. I can understand wanting to have something else go out there that's easier to make, cheaper to make, and wanting to make some cash in between the big releases, right? Like Dark Souls 3 and Elden Ring. But yeah, we'll kind of see how people ultimately respond to this. So personally, NightReign accomplishes this design what it's trying to be. It needs some refinement and continued final bosses to be added with DLC if it's going to continue, because once people tap out, then they might kind of be done because they've already done everything. But ultimately, I see possibly the game dying out after a while. Right now, it's having a great start. It's got 300,000 peak on launch, which was actually the highest peak on Steam. And then now we're looking at around 250, 270 for a peak for today. We already know that 2 million copies have sold at launch. But part of the reason I think the game is going to die out is, again, there's no cross-platform. There's no duos. And so teams of 2 have to have a third random in there, which can certainly affect the game. And then people can also get stuck on a final boss and not be able to push forward. And maybe not even necessarily any fault of their own, but just the fact that the randoms can't perform at the level they need to actually take the boss down. And then also not having any communication. So all of this on top of it is kind of restrictive for the success of the game. And it's not necessarily the challenging part of the game or that the bosses are challenging. They're more tanks than anything else. And we've basically beaten and played most of these before. I think the final bosses, I think most of them will maybe be different. We might recognize some, but we won't know that until we actually unlock them by beating previous final bosses. But like these things that are restrictive and hindering the experience aren't necessarily, again, the gameplay. It's not being able to talk, not having cross platforms, so like having trouble finding queues after a while as the player base kind of gives up on certain platforms. I certainly think too on Xbox, because that's probably the smallest with how many consoles they've sold. So yeah, there are some issues working on holding this game back. I think too, yeah, those will eventually or ultimately cap the available player base for folks. And then too, just like the closed beta, the same concerns that I had in the beta, I am still seeing those at launch. So I still feel like the DLC or that this type of game, NightReign, I feel like it should have been a DLC for Elden Ring as a mode to play, and instead of it being a standalone thing. And I think too they should have done maybe instead of a land like this and making it more like Fortnite or Warzone, I think they should have gone the route of actually having chalice dungeons from Bloodborne and actually having those be randomized and working through your chalice to unlock your next one so that you can continue and having like 15 or 20 chalice, right? And being able to call in with different people. But something that's being called for too is again those duos, and we'll see if they do that. But what we have right now, we basically have one map and everyone is stuck on the same boss, and people are complaining about being held back by their team. So if you have people to play with, this game's going to be great. If you like playing with randoms and giving it a shot, this game's going to be great. If you really don't have people that you know to play with, that you don't click with, a lot of these sessions are going to be frustrating, and that's just how it is. Right now, I'm giving the game a 6 out of 10. And again, if you have friends to play with, it's great. Otherwise, it's going to be brutal. I'm also not interested in Duskbloods if there's such a focus on multiplayer, because the thing that actually made Elden Ring and Dark Souls great in Bloodborne is that you could work through the story, you could work through the lands, you could see the changes and ultimately get to the end. And there were people that could either co-op with you or you could have randoms come in and help you. And then you had those invaders too. But like it wasn't over. You didn't feel like you completely wasted your time. You were still able to just go back to the last bonfire or site of grace and just continue on and hopefully get your souls back. But even if you lost your souls, it wasn't the end. With these sessions, you generally kind of feel like you wasted your time or you had another team that couldn't perform, or maybe you couldn't perform either because, again, the game is more challenging than the closed beta. And so, yeah, you feel like you're just kind of sighing at your screen. It's like, oh, there goes another one. So, yeah, what do you guys think for those that you have played it? Are you interested in more multiplayer games, or are you wishing more of the Dark Souls and Elden Ring type of stuff? So go ahead and let me know in the comments. Thanks for tuning in. You can always find me at Gaming Garbage 22 over at YouTube. You can also find me over at Twitch at Don't Tread on D. And then also don't forget the playlist on YouTube. There's a lot there that we actually do on the channel. So with that, folks, we'll see you guys on the next one.